Hi, family. I hope you're doing good today. I know this one's going to hit different because it's not just a crime story, it's a story about silence, about a young woman whose name should be in every history book and a justice system that chose to forget her. But we're not forgetting her. Not here. Before we get into it, hit that like button and subscribe if you're new here. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, drop a comment with her name. Let's keep her voice alive. Now, imagine this. It's a warm summer night, August 28th, 1976. The sun's just dipped below the Wicklow coast. Brittas Bay is buzzing. Locals, tourists, families, all soaking up the last light of the Irish summer. And among them is a 23-year-old woman named Elizabeth Plunkett. She's kind, she's sharp, she works in the Irish Film Centre in Dublin. She's out there with friends, laughing, living. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet night by the sea, maybe a drink or two, some music in the air, the kind of peaceful energy we all crave. But that night, Elizabeth doesn't come home. What her family didn't know, what no one could have imagined, is that she had crossed paths with two men who were already on a spree of unspeakable violence, two predators who were hunting. And while the rest of Ireland went to bed that night in peace, Elizabeth Plunkett vanished. No witnesses, no immediate panic, just silence. Until weeks later, when her body was discovered, dumped, violated, her life stolen. The men responsible, none, arrested, even admitted what they did. But here's the twist: they were never tried for her murder. And today, almost 50 years later, the man who raped and killed her is walking free. So why? What happened? And how did justice slip away so easily? Stick with me, because what you're about to hear is more than a crime story. It's a failure to protect, to prosecute, and to remember. Let's go back to the beginning and start putting the pieces together. So let's rewind the clock. After Elizabeth Plunkett disappeared in late August of 1976, there wasn't immediate panic. Her friends were confused, her family worried, but nobody knew what had really happened. Not yet. Meanwhile, two men, John Shaw and Geoffrey Evans, were quietly leaving a trail of horror across Ireland. Both were British nationals, both already had violent records back in England. But somehow they had slipped through the cracks and made their way to Ireland. To hunt. That's not exaggeration. When they were finally caught, Evans literally told guards their plan was to rape and kill a woman every week. Let that sink in. They weren't just out of control, they were methodical, calculated, evil. Over the span of a few weeks, two women vanished and were later found murdered. Elizabeth Plunkett was the first. Then came Mary Duffy, who was abducted from Ballina in September. Her body was discovered in a bog. That second murder. That's the one that finally got the guards to put it together. Shaw and Evans were arrested in October 1976 in Cork after attempting to abduct another woman. She got away, and that escape may have saved more lives. During interrogation, they confessed to multiple crimes, including the abduction, rape, and murder of Elizabeth Plunkett. So, case closed, right? No, not even close. The director of public prosecutions decided to drop the murder charge for Elizabeth's case in 1979. Why? Because they believed securing convictions for Mary Duffy's murder would be enough. It was a deal with the devil kind of logic. Get the life sentences, save time, move on. But in doing that, they erased Elizabeth's name from the courtroom. Her family never got to sit through a trial. Her case was closed, but not solved. And John Shaw was never legally held accountable for her death. Fast forward to today, and he's out of prison. Now imagine being her brother, her sister, watching him walk free. knowing he never served a single day for what he did to her. And still, no cold case review, no reopening, no justice. Now, here's where the story takes a turn. For decades, the Plunkett family were left with silence. No updates, no real answers, just pain. But then in 2023, something powerful happened. Arte released a podcast series called Stolen Sister. If you haven't heard it yet, I highly recommend it. It's raw, emotional, and beautifully reported. The series was built around Elizabeth's story, not just the crime itself, but the decades of neglect, the cold case files that were never reopened, and the systems that failed her. And what's wild, that podcast uncovered new witnesses. I'm talking real people who came forward and said, I saw something, or I experienced something, or I was almost next. One woman recalled almost being abducted just days after Elizabeth. She described a car, a man, the fear, and she wasn't alone. The podcast team gathered at least 7 witness accounts, people who were targeted, followed, or barely escaped. Some of these stories had never been reported before. But even with all that, still no action, no reopening, no re interviewing, nothing. The podcast did something the guards hadn't done in decades. It built a fresh investigation. It gave the public a timeline, a pattern, a motive, and more importantly, it gave the Plunkett family hope. Hope that the silence might finally break. Hope that someone, somewhere, might listen. All right, family, now imagine this. It's January 2025. 48 years after Elizabeth Plunkett was murdered, the Wicklow Coroner's Court finally holds an inquest into her death. Think about that. Her family waited nearly half a century just to hear a legal voice speak her truth. And what the coroner said, it was chilling. Dr. Sean Nixon ruled that Elizabeth's death was a case of unlawful killing. He said the cause was probable asphyxiation due to strangulation. Her remains had been found in a shallow grave wrapped in a curtain. There were clear signs of sexual assault. All of this, by the way, was known back in the 1970s. But here's the kicker. Even after that official ruling, even with the word murder now formally tied to her name again, the guards still said no new investigation. The coroner's verdict gave her family validation, but it didn't give them justice. And for her sister Mary, who sat in that courtroom with tears in her eyes, it was too little, too late. Now brace yourself, because this part, it's beyond frustrating. In 2023, Elizabeth's family learned something that shook them to the core. They found out that because John Shaw was never convicted of her murder, they were not considered official victims under the parole system. Let that sink in. This man confessed. He was investigated. He gave details about the crime. He even showed investigators where her body was. But because he wasn't tried for Elizabeth's case, her family had no right to be heard when he applied for parole. They weren't notified. They weren't consulted. They weren't allowed to give a victim impact statement. The law erased their pain. And when Shaw was granted early release, her siblings found out after the fact like spectators in a system that never saw them. Imagine waiting decades only to be told your sister's murder doesn't count. But here's what's beautiful and powerful. The public isn't staying silent anymore. After the Arte podcast, after the inquest, and after the parole outrage, people started speaking up. A petition was launched by supporters and activists. As of this week, it's gathered over 2 million signatures calling for the case to be reopened and re-examined. Ivana Basic, leader of the Labour Party, stood in the Dale and demanded answers. She said it was time the justice system addressed Elizabeth's case with real action. Other politicians followed. Questions were raised. Headlines exploded. Talk shows opened phone lines. Victim advocacy groups started pushing for reform, especially for families who are denied their rights under technicalities. But even with all this energy, the Department of Justice and the guards continue to say, no cold case review. They claim there's nothing new to pursue. But we know that's not true. New witnesses, new public pressure, and new ruling from the coroner. It's all there. They just don't want to move. So here we are, 48 years later. Elizabeth Plunkett is still waiting for her day in court. Her family is still begging for recognition, and the man who ended her life is breathing free air. But maybe now, with all this attention, things can shift. That's where you come in. If you made it this far in the video, I want to ask you something. Do you think this case should be reopened? Do you believe her story deserves more? If the answer is yes, leave a comment with her name, Elizabeth Plunkett. Share this video, talk about it, keep her alive through memory, because if we stay silent, the system wins. And if you're someone watching who works in law, media, or the justice system, maybe it's time to ask the hard question. How many more Elizabeths are out there, forgotten by paperwork,